My name is Lindsay Davis, and I will be presenting my thoughts on the reopening of small non-essential businesses in rural communities during the COVID-19 outbreak. As we all know, the coronavirus pandemic has completely changed life as we know it. I'm one of the lucky ones, and I have never had any experience with this disease, and neither have my friends, family members, or acquaintances. I live in a very rural area with a low population. My county, which is Lawrence County, Tennessee, has had 17 positive cases of COVID-19 within the year. As of this week, all of them have been deemed recovered. I am in no way, shape, or form advising anyone to go outside of their social distancing and self-quarantine decisions if they are immunocompromised or symptomatic. I am simply stating that small business owners in rural communities will never recover should this extend for more than 2 business quarters. As referenced in the working paper put out by the Becker-Friedman Institute in Chicago, the pandemic has already caused massive dislocation of small businesses, as written by Alexander Bardick in 2020. 3/4 of the respondents to his paper state that they only have enough cash on hand to cover 2 months' worth of expenses. This is a very big problem, as most people do not have more than that on hand unless they are a part of a large chain franchise. If the case numbers have stabilized in a rural region, businesses should be allowed to reopen with proper social distancing and disinfection protocols. I realize that this is not achievable for every area, and I am in no way, shape, or form advising any of this to apply to metropolitan areas or major cities. They are a completely different beast and should be treated as such. I will not speak to reopening areas like that until the pandemic has stabilized in that area. Considering my town has a population of 4,500 people, the risk for getting COVID-19 is much lower than that of a person living in Nashville or Memphis, Tennessee. Everyone I have come into contact with, either in person or social media, has followed the social distancing protocols very well. Obviously, there are essential workers here, and most of them are factory workers, road workers, nurses, and things of that nature. And they have all taken this very seriously and choose to isolate themselves somewhat from their families. Many of the small businesses local to me have been able to stay afloat via an online approach, but that is not always sustainable when you are having to rent a storefront. On May 1st, they were allowed to open while practicing proper social distancing and disinfection protocol. Salons were delayed, however, and this caused a lot of frustration within the community, as restaurants were allowed to open earlier than the salons, even though restaurants house more people at a time. I am not a scientist or a professor, but I was a clinical student in the surgical unit at Vanderbilt University during the beginning of this pandemic. My clinical rotations went on as usual for 2 weeks until supplies started to get low as shipping was delayed from China and other manufacturing hubs. This means that my clinical rotations ceased on March 19th of 2020. Since then, I have been in my house practicing social distancing, only going out for essential trips and outdoor activities. In order to understand the economic impact of this, we must look to Andrew Atkinson's published working paper, and he published this in March of 2020. In this work, he proposes a simple SIR model of the progression of COVID-19 over the next 12 to 18 months, which is the expected time frame for them to be able to develop a vaccine for this disease. The main conclusion derived from economists is that severe social distancing practices until a vaccine can be developed will be absolutely necessary. I am targeting this presentation towards rural communities who have been affected little by this pandemic. Once again, I'm not advocating for the absence of social distancing, but in order for our economy To remain stable, our small businesses must be able to continue operation. Rural communities who are comprised of essential and non-essential workers should be left to the devices of their own local governments in order to make decisions that will best benefit their citizens. State governors are preoccupied with major metropolitan areas, and they should be. We have local governments for a reason, and they are meant to lead us in these times. I will once again state that anyone who is feeling ill or is immunocompromised should not go against the decision to quarantine themselves. I am simply stating that many people in small communities will be unable to afford their living expenses if they cannot generate a revenue for themselves. Many of my close friends are cosmetologists, and they are experiencing huge deficits in their normal yearly profits and earnings. For a large family, the stimulus check that was received and sent out by President Trump cannot fully cover a large family. They have to worry about rent and groceries and everything else, car payments, all that. And I realize that these things were supposed to be deferred, but once the deferment order is lifted, those payments will be expected in full, and they cannot rely on things such as stimulus checks to pay them. Again, I'm only speaking to communities similar to mine, and I'm not advising metropolitan areas in any way. In order to further illustrate this point, we must look to how the economy has already been impacted. As referenced in the working paper put out by the Becker-Friedman Institute in Chicago, 3/4 of the respondents state that they only have enough cash on hand to last 2 months. The reopening of businesses with social distancing precautions will boost the economy enough to help it survive the year. I fully understand that outlining a system to fit everyone's needs is next to impossible, but I think that local governments being allowed to develop their own guidelines based on the number of active cases will be beneficial in communities such as mine. The importance of keeping small businesses alive is very dear to me, as most of my friends and family members have some type of dealings or involvement in them. I have many family members who own small businesses or work for them, and it has been very hard to see them go without for so long. Small businesses are the backbone of rural America, and seeing them take such a detrimental hit would be extremely awful for morale around here. If you are sick or immunocompromised, please take care of yourself and others by remaining home. For those essential workers, make sure to properly disinfect all surfaces in your home in an effort to get back to normal as quick as possible. I realize that something such as this has not been experienced in a very long time, but this too shall pass, just like everything else. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this speech, and I understand that the format is very different than normal, but we'll get through this. Thanks, guys.